And welcome again to another short astrological video courtesy of investingsuccess.ca. Today is the 18th of November 2024. In this video, I want to go back and revisit some of the various rules that were laid down in the 1930s by a very mysterious figure by the name of George Bayer. He was German. He landed in New York City around about 1899 or 1900. Very little else is known about him except that he took up residence in New York and he started visiting a brokerage firm somewhere in New York, and he was placing trades on Chicago wheat and other various commodities. But he was using a lot of astrology. Now, where he got this knowledge, we do not know. I don't even know what the man looked like. I can't even find any pictures. He kept a very low-key profile. Now, compare that, of course, to W.D. Gann, whose pictures are everywhere and whose notoriety is well documented. All we know about Bayer is that in 1937, after several decades of making money and trading, he took it upon himself to write down a lot of his rules and a lot of his thoughts, and he published a series of small books, and you can buy them online. And then he retired. He just disappeared and was never heard from again. And so I've actually been studying some of his rules. Now, where he got these things, I have no idea, because I certainly have not seen anything of comparison in W.D. Gann's work. So Bayer had his own set of stuff that he brought with him from Germany. And anyways, he used it, he made his money, he retired, he disappeared. So let's take a look now at one of his rules. The rule that I'm going to look at is called rule number 11A. And it is a little complicated because I'm going to steer you into stuff you've never heard of before. I'm going to talk about right ascension. 15 degrees of planetary movement is the equivalent of 1 hour of right ascension. So that's the most important thing you need to know. And we begin counting hours of right ascension from 0 degrees of Aries. So what Bayer's rule number 11A says is identify a pivot point, and it doesn't have to be a significant major multi-year top. It can be just a pivot point. Take a note of the geocentric degree positioning of Venus at that pivot point. You're going to convert that into right ascension. Then you're going to add a multiple, and this is where I don't know where he got this stuff. He said you're going to take that right ascension and you're going to add to that the quantity of 4 times 1 hour, 37 minutes, and 32 seconds. That should, in theory, align to the next pivot point event. So to keep the math simple, 4 times 1 hour, 37 minutes, 32 seconds. Let's just say that is the equivalent of 6.5 hours in round figures. So we're going to find a pivot point. We're going to see what the degree location of geocentric Venus was. We're going to convert that into right ascension. We're going to add 6.5 hours, and then we're going to translate that back into degrees, and then we're going to ask ourselves, where was Venus located at that particular degree count? I'm going to start from the 19th of April, 2024. There is a pivot point, as you can see on the chart here. Markets have declined in late March and most of April. Venus at that time, at that bottom, at the pivot, was 18 degrees of Aries. So if we take 18 degrees of Aries and divide that by 15 to convert it into right ascension, that's the same as saying Venus was at 1.2 hours of right ascension. Now we're going to add our 6.5 hours. So 1.2 and 6.5 is 7.7 hours of right ascension. We're going to convert that back into degrees, 115.5 degrees. So then the question is, when was Venus at 115.5 degrees? Or in other words, when was Venus at 26 of Cancer? Here's your answer, right at this red arrow here. And look where that came. 1, 2, 3, let's call it 4 days ahead of a significant drawdown on the S&P. So again, I don't know where Bayer got this 4 times 1 hour and 37 minutes and 42 seconds figure from, but here's one example of where it actually worked. Okay, so we know that mathematically we very nearly nailed a significant pivot point. So let's actually go to that pivot point. We know that that pivot point occurred on the 16th of July. Venus was at 6 degrees of Leo. Convert that, that's 8.4 degrees of right ascension. We're going to add our 6.5 hours. That gives us 14.9 hours of right ascension. We're going to convert that to degrees, and it works out to 223.5 degrees. That is the equivalent of 14 of Scorpio. So, when was Venus at 14 of Scorpio? Here's the answer, right at this green arrow. Yes, there is a pivot point, no doubt about it. The markets were very uncertain as to whether or not they wanted to push higher. There was consolidation, and right at that pivot point that we've just calculated, the markets put on another little push higher. So now, let's just take this particular point here in October where the market pushed higher and then faded again. We're going to apply that same mathematics, and basically what it works out to is keep your eye on the 10th of January 2025. Is it going to be a major pivot point that gives you a severe drawdown? Maybe. Then again, maybe not. If you want to do the math, take a look in early November, right around the presidential election time. Figure out where Venus was, do the math. That's going to equate to something then later in January, maybe early February. And then if you want to go one step further, take the peak where the market got over 6,000 but couldn't hold. That's probably going to translate into something in, I'm going to say late February, early March. And if you've been watching some of my other videos on timing, most notably with planets like Venus, we know already that there's something coming at us in March. There's a number of days in March where some cyclical stuff comes to an end regarding Venus. And I'm also going to tell you that January 10th is within a couple days of the midpoint crest or the midpoint peak of one of these 28 bar cycles of the S&P on the weekly chart. So it's all connected, and there is no one definitive mathematical rule or technique that defines everything for you. You have to apply a whole litany of these things, but once you start applying them, you can start to pick out these dates ahead of time. And then what you have to do is look at the chart technical indicators like your slow stochastic, your true strength index, and you got to see if the trend is starting to change as these particular dates that you have calculated arrive. And I think you'll find that, yes, the trend quite often does change at these astrological dates. And so, yes, here's the cyclical chart of the S&P. This is a weekly chart, 28 bar cycles. So yeah, early part of January, like around the 12th, there's your midpoint peak of that cycle, and that's exactly what this Rule 11A from Mr. Bayer is also pointing to. And so I have probably confused you beyond belief. You're going to have to go back and watch this one several times, I'm sure. And then once you take a pencil and paper and start fiddling around with some of the numbers, you'll find that this right ascension stuff actually starts to make sense. So just remember that 1 hour of right ascension is the equivalent of 15 degrees of geocentric motion, and it is the planet Venus that we are focused on. And I will leave it at that. So again, you know where to find me, investingsuccess.ca. You know what I do. And I'm going to keep producing these short little videos. And my goal in all of this is to make bloody well sure that these techniques from Gann and Bayer and all of those other guys in the 20s, 30s, 40s, I don't want this stuff to disappear. I want people to use it because it worked back then and it's working today. And the only time it doesn't work very well today is when the Federal Reserve steps in and does crazy shit with monetary supply and jacks around interest rates. But I think a lot of that printing of money in the aftermath of COVID and in the aftermath of other crises is probably over for now. So I think you're going to see this stuff actually working until the depths of the next crisis, which we know is coming in 2026. All right, you have a good day, and thanks again for watching. Take care.